Welcome, Dr. David Hamilton. How are you?
I'm very well, Paul. How are you today?
Yeah, I am on fire, and I've been a big fan of your work for quite a while.
Oh,
Though your
thanks.
latest book title, I kind of feel like I have to ask you for permission on how it sounds. What is it called?
It's called The Joy of Actually Giving a Fuck.
Yeah, I just want to, yeah, because I don't know, sometimes people just beep it or say it differently. So the joy of actually
Yeah.
giving a fuck. Let's have a
Yeah.
little dive into this book. What is it about?
So it's about how being kind supports your mental and your physical health. I mean, ultimately helping other people, and I don't just mean the big grand gestures, the visible ones, but the everyday small things, like the wee shows of support, the wee bits of encouragement, checking in on people. These everyday ordinary things, they're actually astonishingly good for our mental well-being, and they also have physiological effects from into the heart and the immune system, a whole host of different things. And also they actually create ripple effects, very subtle but sometimes bigger than that impact on the people and the environment around ourselves. So it really is, it's a win-win-win ultimately, when you be kind. So the book's all about that, and what I've done with it is show little bits of science as to why this is actually true, with a couple of wee bits of inspiration, heartfelt, personal stories as well.
I think the message is absolutely timely at the moment in regards to being more kind. But I mean, we'll dive into the biology of it because I think people need to know how powerful kindness actually is. But before we do that, why do we struggle as a species to be so kind, do you think?
I think it's I think it's we sometimes not set necessarily the best examples, and we get this idea that to win it means someone else is going to lose. And when I say best examples, typically we're coming up for an election, and you hear politicians
Mm.
arguing with each other all the time, and that's what we see on our airwaves all the time. And then secondly, uh, I think it's been ingrained in many people, especially in the business kind of world, that if you're going to win, someone else is going to lose. But in fact, that isn't necessarily true either, because winning in the long term, I think we're genetically wired to bond and connect. That's what we're supposed to do. And so winning in the long term really should be doing things that actually foster better connection. And what better way of doing that than different forms of kindness? I mean, the practical stuff, but also, the trust and the honesty and the integrity, all these kind of things actually win in
Mm.
the long term without anyone really having to lose. And I think it's just shifting the mindset that we're in the process of doing, that it just takes a wee bit of time sometimes.
Yeah, it seems that it's, especially for men, there's this almost embarrassment to show kindness because it's classed as vulnerability to be seen
Mm.
as weak. What would you say? What would you say would be an antidote or a shift in mindset for someone who's thinking, I'd love to be a bit more kinder, but a bit embarrassing?
Yeah, that some of that actually, I wrote about this in the book. Actually, some of this actually comes
Mm.
from mistaken ideas of what it is to be strong. For example, the whole idea of survival of the
Mm.
fittest. We've somehow got this idea that fittest means the physically strongest, the toughest. But that's actually not, Darwin didn't actually say that anyway. But what Darwin actually said in terms of that kind of stuff was that which is more adaptable. The person who's most adaptable, who's gentler, who can make friends, who can interact and fit in. That's actually what works better for us in the long term, mentally, physically.
Mm.
And I think, again, it's just a mindset thing. We've got this in our idea, in our minds, that to be masculine, it means to be strong. And so we've got this idea that kindness, therefore, is weak. But it's absolutely not weak at all. And also, like, about 100, when I was doing some research on this, about 100 and odd years ago, maybe not quite as far back as this, there was this idea of the angel of the house in Victorian times. And it was always a female, and always tending to and doing the soft and the
Mm.
caring stuff, and the man was supposed to be the strong and the robust, and again, with that, I think that's ingrained in some of our psyches, that we can't show any of these kind of seeming feminine traits, but they're not feminine traits at all. They're human. Kindness is a human trait that everyone has, but I think sometimes in the male psyche, we've just got this idea that I've still got to be strong and tough, and that's what actual real strength is. But real strength ultimately is the ability to adapt, the ability to be, that which connects with other people, because that's what we're genetically wired to do. So sometimes you need to connect and bond with people in life. You actually need some of these seemingly softer skills.
No, I absolutely agree with that. And I do think this sort of whole mindset around, we will call it toxic masculinity, cuts men off from
Mm.
that wonderful healing connection, which it works on so many levels. And we'll talk about the biology of that in a moment. Um, but I often think it can be a good thing, because I think sometimes it can push men to go, do you know, I'm so unhappy. Things are not working out well for me. And the new car or the new girlfriend or the new holiday hasn't solved my problem. So now I have to go inwards and have a look at what is it inside of me that's making me so miserable. And maybe then that's when people can discover the
Absolutely.
message of, well, actually, kindness is a bit of a superpower here. What do you think?
Yeah. Yeah, I absolutely agree. In fact, I went through something kind of similar to that, not exactly like that, but kind of similar, when I had to
Mm.
revisit all the ways that I thought. I mean, several years ago, I was working in research and development at the time, and I struggled with depression, but I didn't tell anyone, because I had this, again, it was this male idea that, I felt ashamed
Mm.
to show a seeming
Yeah.
vulnerability and weakness. And also, I had always been the kind of upbeat, the positive guy. If someone's in trouble, someone's struggling in life, I'm the guy got a wee pat in the back and a wee bit of motivational speech for them and set them on their way, kind of thing. And I think I'd uh, held on to that part of my identity. That became something that defined me in my own head. And then when I started struggling with depression, I didn't want to tell anyone, because I literally felt ashamed and I felt weak and I felt vulnerable, and I thought, I can't show these kind of things. So what I actually did is I shrunk back from all my friends. I stopped keeping in touch with people, and I made excuses for not going out. And I used to leave work even as early as I was allowed. Back then we had flexi time, and the earliest you could leave was 4 p.m. And I used to leave pretty much at 4 p.m., get in the car, drive home, park the car outside my house, get in the house, lock the door, and then lie down on the floor or the settee for a wee while and cry, because I just felt so kind of miserable all the time. And
Mm.
what actually began to turn things around was opening up and showing a wee bit of vulnerability. My mum used to keep phoning me up, because mums just know sometimes. My mum would just phone on a Sunday, because I was living at the time about 250 miles away from where I grew up, working in Cheshire. Actually, I was working, and my mum would say, "Look, I feel there's something wrong, and you're not telling me." My mum was worried that there was something physically wrong as well. And I said, "Mum, I'm fine. I'm just, work's a bit kind of stressful, but yeah, I'm upbeat and I'm fine, happy and all that." And I was just, trying to pretend. They call it smiling depression. You're smiling the
Yeah.
outside, but you're feeling the exact opposite on the inside. And finally, one Sunday, I told my mum. I said, "Look, Mum, I'm struggling with depression." And my mum knew what that's like, because my mum had struggled with depression for a long time. After my youngest sister was born, my mum developed postnatal depression. It wasn't understood very well in the 70s. My mum was actually told, in fact, to give yourself a shake. That's how badly it was understood, back then, nearly 50 years ago. So my mum says, "Right, you're coming home." And I literally got in the car and I drove 250 miles home, as I was told. And the beginning of my recovery was opening up, something I'd never done before, because I'd always tried to be the man. I'd always tried to be strong and tough and
Mm.
have all the answers. And that was the first time I think I showed, especially to my mum and then my dad. And I spent the week with my mum and my dad. And the beginning of my recovery from depression was that moment of opening up to my mum, and then allowing my mum and dad to care, and continually talking to them about the stuff that I was struggling with, and not even talking about the stuff, just knowing that they're there as I talked about stuff. And over the next maybe 4, 5, 6 months, I gradually got better and better. I mean, not in a straight line, it was ups and downs, but I gradually
Mm.
got better. But I could track it back to that, seeming vulnerability, that moment where I just decided to let go and stop being tough.
What do you, I mean, it's wonderful that you develop that sort of, internal conversation and your mum was there to help you. But what do you think was the cause of depression for yourself and maybe for other people? What's going on for that to happen, on a physical and mental level for you?
Yeah, I think it's different. It can be different for different people. There can be different triggers, different kind of reasons. For me, the root of it at the time was my life was going in a direction that I knew in my heart I didn't want to go in. And what actually, that was actually the beginning of the end of me working as a research and development scientist. Because eventually, that was the beginning of it. 6 months later, I got a moment of absolute clarity when I realized that I didn't have to follow the academic path I'd been on, because I'd done my degree, my PhD, and I was now working in a senior research and development position. And I was just going through the motions, doing the job that I believed I was supposed to do, given the qualifications I'd worked so hard to obtain. Whereas in my heart, what I actually wanted to do was write and teach. Even though I'd failed my English at school in my first attempt, but something inside me knew
Mm.
that the idea of teaching and explaining things and writing just appealed to me. But I'd suppressed it for so long because it never occurred to me that I actually could do it. It was just, we have, I think for me, it was that suppression of who I actually was that at that time was beginning to come out, and that's where the cracks appeared in my psyche. So that, for me, look on reflection, was why I was struggling with depression, because it was like I was trying to keep myself going in the direction I believed I was supposed to do, and ignoring the bigger part of me, which is what I do now. The bigger part of me, i.e., writing and speaking, which is what I do now.
Yeah.
And I had to allow that
Yeah.
that transition to occur. Eventually, I left the job.
And when you say the bigger part of you, you said you were suppressing you. Do you think that's you, or are you talking about your soul, your spirit, or something else? What is it that you were suppressing in favor of this sort of conditioned idea that you need to do this academic route and, the researcher side of things? What was it you were suppressing? And, yeah.
Yeah, no, that's a really good question, Paul. If I'm honest, probably what
Mm.
I've possibly felt in my heart is my sense of purpose, and maybe, and I would say that possibly even has a spiritual undertone for me. A sense of
Mm.
purpose, a sense of, this is what I'm here to do, kind of thing. And I think I'd just been suppressing that by going down the road that I thought I should do, because I'd done all the academic stuff. So this is what you're supposed to do. You educated, you go into
Mm.
university, then you get a job, and then you do the thing. And that's had been ingrained in me all my life, because that's what everybody else did. And I think maybe in a more kind of spiritual sense, at that time I was actually beginning to explore. I had been exploring more spiritual ideas of things round about that kind of time in the
Mm.
previous few years as well. So maybe for me, it was a deep sense of my higher self coming to the surface and saying, look, this is my path. This is what I'm supposed to be here to do. And I'm just not doing it. And so a crisis occurred in my health, my mental health.
Yeah, it's often said, and I like what you're saying, because it does remind me of, what I've experienced with having a moment of crisis. And then suddenly there's this like light bulb that turns on, and it's almost this intuition and knowing that we need to change course, we need to change path. That you're on, not the wrong
Yeah.
path, but this is going to be no longer right for you. And that suffering, that pain, the depression, the anxiety will keep knocking at your door until you decide to change course. And I think
Mm.
that in a way it's kind of an awakening mindset, isn't it? It's that we'll call it spiritual awakening, or an awakening of sorts to the truth of who you are and the truth of what it is that you
Mm.
really want to do in life.
Yeah, that's exactly what it was like for me, because for the first time, I really started exploring over the recovery, beyond the recovery period. I think when I felt
Mm.
like I was back to my normal self, that was probably about 6 months, possibly, from that moment when I spoke to my mum, and then spent the week with my mum and my dad. And about 6 months later, I remember even it was the 28th of December 1998 when I had and I remember it to this day. I was in a coffee shop. I was home for Christmas, and I was in a coffee shop in Glasgow in Scotland, and I was just writing down in a kind of journal. I was reading, and I was kind of taking wee notes and writing my own ideas. And it was that moment of clarity. I don't need to stay in this job. Like, I don't need to. I can actually leave. And all of a sudden, I felt
Mm.
bigger. I felt expanded. And then from that moment, some of my more kind of higher thoughts about what's my purpose and all the began to flood. I think that was that 28th of December 1998 for me, because it was etched in my mind as a turning point in my life. It was that moment of clarity where I realized that I didn't have to keep following this path. Yes, I'd talked to my mum,
Wow.
my dad about it, and found a bit of peace, but I hadn't made that connection that I didn't have to do it anymore. And that was when I made the decision, I don't have to do it anymore. I can do something else. And it was over the next few months that the clarity of what that would look like began. I think these deeper parts of myself began to come through. I can write, I can speak, I
Mm.
can teach. That's what I want to do. And it was just an evolution over the next 6 months and it was about 6 months later when I decided to resign from the job.
Wow. I mean, I love what you're saying. And if there's anyone listening to this who's thinking, oh, I need help, this feels like me, what would you advise? Because we'll talk about more what happened next, but what would you advise to someone who can relate to what you're saying right now? They feel they're on the wrong path, or they're feeling trapped and they're maybe feeling low and depressed. What would you
The,
suggest?
the first thing I would say from my own experience is the transformational uh, benefit of talking to someone, reaching out. I would not
Mm.
have got any degree of clarity had I not spoke to my mum and finally opened up. My mum had been phoning me for a couple of months because I'd actually been struggling with depression for probably 4 or 5, maybe even longer, 5 months at least. I'd been crying regularly, at least for a few months. And I think it was that reaching out, telling my mum that's the best advice probably I could give people, because I think everyone's situation practically is slightly different, and it depends on the context of your life, I suppose. But I think that's a universal thing that everyone can do. That for me was an absolute game changer. It was that opening up to my mum that set my new path in motion. And if I didn't do that, then I don't know what maybe I'd have reached a deeper crisis point. I don't know
Yeah.
what would have happened beyond then, but for me, it was the opening up and that's the best advice I think I could probably give people. That's a universal advice.
Yeah, yeah. It is such great advice, such great advice. And what was interesting, and we're very grateful that you had this crisis, by the way, because it's obviously led you onto this mission. How would you describe your mission, David? In what is it you want us all to know?
Uh, I think for me, I've probably got a couple of different levels to what I think is my mission or my purpose. On one
Okay.
level, I would say my mission is to educate about the importance of kindness and why it's necessary, and to do that. Because I want to
Mm.
try and I think the world would be a much better place. I don't just mean the world at large, but our individual worlds, our families, our workplaces, everywhere that we define as our environment, everything can be improved through kindness. Everything can be improved through kindness. Every
Yeah.
every sort of environment, and I think partly how I'm doing that, how I think of this as a bit of a mission, is by educating around the health benefits of kindness, by coming at it from a way that people they don't know much about. So I'm putting all this fascinating context around kindness to get the conversation started, you know, and maybe if I go to the kind of deeper purpose for me, what has felt to be true for me is that maybe my deeper purpose is to be a light or a candle that just kind of helps to light up the
Mm.
area so that other people can find their way in the dark. really. And that sounds a bit kind of cryptic, but that's just sort of intuitively
Yeah.
what part of what
Yeah.
I feel my purpose is just to be some form of light that just lights up the way that other people can see in the dark.
I think that's absolutely beautiful. And again, it's you talk a lot about in your work the mind body connection, which is what kindness is also focusing on. So
Mm.
let's have a look at that for the moment. How does kindness or any of our thoughts or any sort of attitude that we cultivate impact the body?
It's through what that experience is like for us. You know, I often make this distinction. I point out that kindness, physiologically and neurologically, is the opposite of stress. And what I mean by that, because I know people might say, well,
Mm.
kindness is a thing that you do, stress is a feeling. So if I rephrase that, uh, the experience of kindness and what that's like and what that does inside the body is physiologically opposite to the experience of stress and what that's like, and therefore the physiological effects. And if you
Mm.
chart, which I have done, many of the physiological neurological effects of stress, you find that kindness, an experience of kindness, what that's like for you in terms of what that feels like and what that, you know, psychologically is like for you, generates the opposite physiological conditions from those set in motion from stress. So because of what that psychological or emotional experience is like for you, that causes a host of changes in the brain. It causes an effect that dials down the intensity of one of the key stress regions of the brain. Consistency on that actually
Okay.
rewires the brain in positive mood centers. It also has a physical effect on the heart, the immune system, even some aspects of aging. Really, in the opposite way from the damaging
Wow.
effect that stress has on all of these different conditions.
I mean, that is powerful, isn't it? You know, just to know
Mm.
that, you know, your thoughts, you know, and, you know, the cultivating an attitude of kindness has such a profound effect on your mind and body. Um, what can people do to begin to cultivate more of a kind mind? I love the fact that I don't know why it's never come up before, and maybe it has, but you promote kindfulness.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So kindfulness is like it's a friendly twist on mindfulness. And it's really, I mean, I would love to say I came up with the name as well, but I didn't. You know, the first time I heard it was when the author Robert Holden uh, wrote it in an endorsement to my previous book on kindness. You know, so that's the first time I'd heard of the actual word, and I've probably just adapted and embellished the word since then, and I actually defined it in the book, funnily enough. But
Mm.
but kindfulness is like any form of mindful practice where at least some part of the object of attention is kindness. So, and when I say some part of it, let's say you're doing a 10-minute mindfulness meditation where the object of attention might be the breath, as a basic example.
Yeah.
At least part of that time, maybe even just for a minute or two, where you just might think of someone that you know in your life, and just maybe think of some things you would like them, you know, maybe that person's got a hope or a dream and just wish that something great happens for them. Or you might just wish them a good day, or you might just allow yourself to remember an experience that you had of kindness, or you might just even empathize with someone who's having a tough time in their life and just say a few things like, may you feel at ease. May you find some peace. May you be
Mm.
happy. And but at least some of the focus is directed towards kindness, and then I would call that kindfulness, and that extends in life as well. You can be mindfully kind then as you go about your day in life, where you respond to opportunities that present themselves to help people, even if it's just a little show of encouragement or support.
I love it. I absolutely love it. And
Mm, thanks.
one of the things that sort of comes out from that is, you know, often when it comes to being kind to other people, that might be easier for some people, but to be kind to themselves is more difficult. And I think that some people listening to this would be nodding because, you know, they're very good at helping out other people, you know, other people at the drop of a hat. But when it comes to themselves, there's some form of self neglect. Any thoughts? What would you suggest? for anyone who
Yeah,
can relate to that?
first of all, part of the reason why we feel guilty about being kind to ourselves is, I think, in many cultures, particularly Western cultures, it's held in high esteem, the idea of putting others before yourself, help others, and it's
Ah,
held in such high esteem, even though it's not we don't always do it, we don't always manage to do it very well, but it's still held in high esteem. So the idea of being kind to yourself therefore feels a bit kind of selfish, but in actual fact, being kind to yourself is crucial for our mental health. And I sometimes talk about a sweet spot, that there's a line, and at one end of and that sweet spot is the balance between being kind to other people
mm,
and also looking after yourself and tending to your own needs. And that sweet spot, that point in the middle, it's different for different people, and it changes at different times of your life depending upon the context. But what I mean by that sweet spot is, sometimes it feels like your cup is full and you don't really need to recharge much. You've got lots of time and energy and resources with which to help other people. And so the balance, the sweet spot is way closer to helping other people. But then there's times in our lives when it feels like our cup, i.e., our energy, our mental energy, emotional energy resource cup, is almost empty. And therefore, the sweet spot is much closer to home. And at this point, we really have to prioritize ourselves and our immediate needs. And because then, if we top up our own cup, if we don't top up our own cup, then there's nothing of us left with which to be of support to other people. So we have to fill up our own cup so that
absolutely.
there's more of us available with which to help other people. And then the sweet spot moves a wee bit further up. So it's a sliding scale. But the point of talking about it as a point or a scale is, it makes us aware that there is this point, and that we do need to always be aware of our own needs, and willing to tend to those needs as a point of necessity.
I think that's a brilliant answer, and I think people really relate to that. And I think there's going to be maybe some people will find it hard to be kind at first, but it's with regular practice it will get easier. Did you
Yeah.
find it hard to practice kindfulness yourself? Were there any challenges for you?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I would say some of it derived from that kind of, the reason why I started the answer with saying we feel guilty because it's
Mm.
held in such high esteem. As a writer and researcher about kindness, for me, it was such high esteem being there for other people. So I really had to work at the the bit about self kindness. In fact, for me, that journey began a few books back, where I wrote a book on
Mm.
self love, called I Heart Me. That was when I had reached a crisis of self esteem, and in that is where I first started to recognise the importance, because I'd already written a book on kindness before then, you see. And that's when I reached a crisis point myself. One of my crisis points, when I realised that I really have to work on myself and on tending to my own needs as well, not instead of other people, but in addition to other
Yeah.
people. So I did struggle with this for a while. But one of the things that's always helped me is, I became really aware that if someone needs my help, someone close to me in the family, or extended family or friends, I always manage to find the time. And I think most of us do that. And maybe I'll even put a wee slot in my diary, like meeting with such and such a thing, a person. But what I started doing then was putting a note in my diary saying meeting with self. And if I felt my cup was
Right.
my cup was running a wee bit dry, I would actually write in meeting with self. And it might be half an hour, it might be 45 minutes, it might be an hour, it might be half a day. But I would put that in, by writing it in my diary, I was psychologically giving it a degree of importance, or equivalent to having a meeting with someone else. And just seeing it written there meant that I was actually working around it, and I could do whatever I like during that meeting with self. I mean, I don't mean I'm having it every day, but it could be sometimes
Mm.
it's frequently, and other times I don't really need it that much. So it depends on the context of my life. But sometimes I'll just go for a walk. Sometimes I'll, read a book. In fact, recently I watched an episode of Star Trek that works for me in the middle of the day. And the
Yeah.
fact it was in the middle of the day when I'm usually busy, that for me was a big psychological statement to myself that I value my mental health and I'm willing to do what I need to do. So the opening for me to practice self-kindness was meeting with self. There's lots of things you can do, but the opening for me was meeting with self, because in my diary it then has the same degree of importance as I'm giving to other people's needs.
I think a lot of people will be maybe looking at their diaries in a whole new way and making making an appointment to meet with themselves. And I think it's a very valid point, because we give so much of ourselves to other people, there's not much left. And if we have an empty cup, then what have we got to give? So I do think that's incredibly powerful. Do you know, is going back to the biology of kindness and some of the things that you actually promote. I remember reading a wonderful book of yours called Your Mind Can Heal Your Body. And I think it relates to, obviously, the work that, it was a famous book, and I gather it did incredibly well, because I think a lot of people could relate to the idea that we're not powerless when it comes to our health, etc.
Yeah.
How does our mind, how does it heal the body? Just for anyone listening, how powerful is our mind in healing our body?
Tremendously powerful. I mean, some of the research in this began even just figuring out, this is where my kind of intellectual journey of it began, by realizing that the placebo effect isn't just a figment of the imagination. The expectation of I will get better because I've taken this tablet, for example, actually changes your brain chemistry. I mean, you literally, it's like dipping into a pharmacy in the brain, and the expectation direct of what you believe is going to happen now. Like either the pain will go away, or the infection will go away, or I'll feel a bit better. Whatever the expectation is, guides the pharmacist's hand, if you will, inside the brain, that determines the brain chemicals that get produced and flooded into the brain and therefore into the body. So it's not just a figment of the imagination. But then you extend that idea into actually harnessing a particular thought, and one of the ways to harness that is through visualization practices. So one of the things I've written a lot about is a repetitive visualization practice, which in a sense is like harnessing a belief or an expectation. And that has a much longer lasting effect. In fact, we actually know now that if I was to visualize making a particular movement, then that is actually wired into the brain in much the same way as if I actually did the physical movement. And so I often say that in many ways the brain doesn't distinguish real from imaginary, and that idea goes a lot deeper than you think. Even to an extent, some research found that women going through treatment for breast cancer, all the women were getting the same treatment, but half of them were educated on how the immune system worked, and asked to visualize their immune systems destroying the tumor. And it was an immunology study. It wasn't the point of the study wasn't looking at the final result. It was to look at how that affected the immune system. And their immune system had a much more robust response to the cancer than the women who didn't visualize. In fact, even after the chemotherapy didn't negatively impact the immune system to the same degree in those who were doing daily visualization. So even visualizing the immune system, which can impact healing in a variety of different ways. We even know now that visualizing your immune system doing something that it's supposed to be doing does actually enhance the way the immune system works.
And so when we're visualizing something healing within the body, does the body produce chemistry to enable that healing, or is something else happening?
It seems to be that my belief is that visualization works in a similar way to the placebo effect. That ultimately the placebo effect works like this: your brain does what it needs to do, within reason, to meet your expectations. And when I say does what it needs to do, what it's able to do, i.e., change in brain chemistry, and therefore impacts the body as well. But when you do visualization practices, then something similar is happening, and now your brain is doing what it needs to do, not necessarily to meet your expectation, but to to establish that which you are repetitively imagining as being true. And so the underlying
Right.
mechanism, I think, is very similar. So within the limitations, or within the ability of what the brain and the body can produce, and the substances it can produce, I think there's a tilt, a movement in body chemistry towards the direction of that which you're imagining to be true. So if you're imagining a healing process or a healed part of the body, then I believe there's a tilt in
Yeah.
the brain chemistry and body chemistry in the direction that makes that more likely.
I mean, that is absolutely incredible, isn't it? I mean, that must have. I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah.
what's the most mind-blowing fact do you think you've ever picked up from, or trial or study that you've ever, that convinced you fully that this is, the real deal?
Yeah, for me, it was actually a study that's affectionately known as a piano study. It was done by a neurologist at Harvard called Alvaro Pascal Leon, where he got volunteers to play a sequence of notes on a piano for a period of time over 5 days, so Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and he scanned their brain each day and found significant changes in the region of the brain connected to the finger muscles. But then he got a separate group of people with no piano, with their hands flat, but to imagine what it would be like to play the piano notes. So it's called kinesthetic imagery. So you're imagining what that would be like if you were actually playing the notes, but
Yeah.
you're not playing them. And he also scanned their brains every day. And amazingly, the changes in the brain were almost identical. And I say almost identical, pretty much identical, because if I showed you both sets of scans and mixed them up, you would not be able to tell the difference. Right? For all intents and purposes, they're actually
Right.
identical. The brain wasn't making a distinction between who played the notes with their fingers and who played the notes with their mind. And for me, that was a game changer of a study. That I knew at that point, I knew a lot about visualization, and I used to be an amateur athlete myself, and then I was an athletics coach during the time when I worked in research and development. So I knew that visualization could be powerful, and I knew how to do it, and I encouraged athletes to do it, and I did it myself. But here for me was the first actual neurological evidence of exactly what happens when you do visualization. It's not just a fanciful thing that maybe you're just somehow psychologically getting more motivated, which I think a lot of people think visualization does. It just makes you more psychologically motivated. That's what I thought, but it goes way beyond that. There's an actual neurological effect, and therefore a physical effect, because that actually affects the muscles as well. Research now shows that if you look at the part of the body that you're imagining, then that also undergoes some degree of change in terms of maybe more strength, more flexibility, faster healing, those kind of things.
I mean, it is mind blowing. And do you use this
Yeah.
yourself? I mean, I know you've got a hamstring injury at the moment. Are you using your visualization techniques to help yourself heal?
Uh, Absolutely. In fact, I play regular tennis. I play in the local leagues. I live
Yeah.
in Dunblane, Andy Murray, Jamie Murray territory, so it's kind of expected. And I play in the leagues, and I play for one of the teams, club teams, and so I play about maybe 4, 5 times a week. And every now and then I pick up a wee injury, like what happens, when you're playing at high intensity. And I always use visualization to accelerate my recovery. So in my mind, I'm thinking if I've got something that would normally maybe take a week to recover from, I'm looking at maybe
Mm.
shaving 2 or 3 days off, that kind of thing. And similarly, the physio told me what the rest period will need for my hamstring, and I'm saying, okay, that's for most people, but there's a bell curve, and there's always people at the high end of the curve and
Yeah.
and stuff, in my mind, I'm always thinking, what are they doing differently from everyone else? And often what they're doing is maybe doing more physiotherapy, they're maybe doing more, dietary stuff, but also visualization. So what I'm hoping to do is shave a wee bit of time off that rehabilitation so that I'm back to my best again.
Amazing. Amazing.
Yeah.
Um, and if we're coming towards the end of our interview, I could keep talking to you for ages because I think this is such a very powerful subject. Um, what is it that you want people to know? What's the takeaway that you want people to know from our conversation and your work together today? What would be the one thing that you hope would stick out in people's minds?
That maybe the thing to me that's most important is that kindness, being kind, even the small things, really can have remarkable effects. I have a friend who is undergoing a kidney dialysis, and after reading an advanced copy of my book, he started. He'd always been a kind person, but he thought maybe I should be more in terms of even the small things that I say to the nurses. And so he started saying to the nurses, "Thanks so much. I really appreciate what you've done, what you're doing for me today." And remember, one of the nurses said, "Oh, it's okay. It's just my job." But she wasn't used to hearing that. But he made a big play every day of thanking people and saying, "You're doing a really good job. I love what, if it wasn't for you, the job that you're doing, and the other nurses as well." And he started to realize that was inflating them, it was lifting them, and then they were being different to the other patients.
Yeah.
And then he was noticing some of the regular patients as well, also then starting to say thanks. And over the period of about 3 or 4 weeks, the energy of the whole place changed completely. And it was everyone was more upbeat and more positive, and there was more happiness in there. And it all came back to him making a decision to do the small thing of saying, "Thank you, you're doing a great job." And it's tiny little things. And I would like to leave people with that, is never underestimate the power of a seemingly tiny little thing, because it might seem small from your perspective, but you've no idea how that might feel and what that might contribute to someone else and their life and how they're feeling in that moment. And therefore, what they then carry it forward and how they impact other people afterwards. We really can transform our environments and our world if we do the little things and mean it,
I think that is beautiful. I really do. I think, we do need more of a kind mind. The world could really do with that right now. And it's like a sort of ripple effect. You've no idea, do you, really, what that one small act or word or sentence to another person, what impact it has on them and what they do with that to other people. And has like a ripple effect across the planet. And I think so. Thank you so much for your work, David. Honestly, it's truly appreciated what you're putting out and the impact that's having. If people want to find out more about you and connect with you, where can they do that?
Well, my website, drdavidhamilton.com, and that you can access everything, all my social media channels. I'm on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, TikTok, all these kind of things. But there's links to all of them through my website anyway.
Wonderful. I'll put those in the show notes to make it easier for people to access. I want to say thank you again for coming on the show. It's an absolute pleasure to have you here, because I've been a fan for ages. And it's just like, when I reached out, I thought, is he going to come on? And you were like, yes. So I was like, I was so happy with that. So it's very much.
It was my pleasure, Paul. I've really enjoyed our conversation. It's been really, really, really enlightening. And, just, it's been a nice chat,
Yeah, it's nice to have a nice conversation about your work and the impact it can have on people. And I think for anyone listening, I really would recommend David's new book, The Joy of Actually Giving a Fuck, which is out on July the 9th. Is that right?
Yeah, July the 9th, yeah.
July 9th. So please go grab a copy, add a bit more kindness into your life. And I just want to say thank you very much for listening to the Mindset Change podcast. I look forward to connecting with you again in the very next episode. Have a wonderful, peaceful, and present day.